Good afternoon. I am Councillor Hugh Mason, Cabinet Member for Planning Policy and City Development. Councillor Kimberly Barrett, the Cabinet Member for Climate Change and Greening the City, is unfortunately unwell today. Therefore, I shall be chairing today's meeting. I am doing so under authority delegated to me by the Leader of the Council to exercise the powers and functions under the Climate Change and Greening the City portfolio for the duration of this meeting. Usual safety information. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery. Not that there's anybody in the public gallery, but the public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble at the turning circle at the end of King Henry Street past the University's Park building. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal regulations, anyone who signed in today at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed. Please switch off the microphone when you have finished speaking. The next paragraph, since there are no members of the press or public here, so far as I can see, does not apply. I assume everybody has read the reports, and probably much more diligently than I have had time to do. So, officers, please just highlight any developments which have occurred since publication and give us a very brief introduction to the matters under consideration. So I think we'd better introduce ourselves. As I said, I am Councillor Hugh Mason, the Councillor for St Jude Ward.
I'm Councillor Graham Heaney. I'm Deputy Leader of the Labour Group. I'm standing in for Councillor Charlotte Gerardo, who is on maternity leave, and so this is why I am here today.
Right.
Dave Emmett, Head of Waste Services.
Hayley Chivers, Transport Planning Manager.
Gareth Williams, Head of Energy Services.
Antonia Curry, Senior Energy Officer.
Christina Downey, Principal Climate Change. I can't even remember my title. Hang on, let's start again. Principal Strategy Advisor for Climate Change. Thank you.
Jane Delino, Local Democracy Officer.
I'm glad I'm not the only one who sometimes forgets what hat I'm wearing. Okay, we come to agenda item 3, which is the Warmer Homes Project update. Who is giving this? Right.
This report is the Warmer Homes Project update, which was requested by the Cabinet Member for Climate Change and Greening the City to provide an update on the Warmer Homes Project. The Warmer Homes Project is delivered on behalf of 23 other local authorities, of which Portsmouth City Council is the lead authority. And it was set up in 2021 through various phases of Department of Energy and Net Zero funding. The paper details the local authority delivery 3 stats, which have the programme has now ended, and this we spent across the consortium 14.4 million and assisted over 1,800 homes. And in Portsmouth, we managed to the project delivered 114 measures in 89 homes, as detailed in section 4. The report then goes on to the Home Upgrade Grant, which is phase 1, which also this scheme ended at the end of July this year. And on completion of the scheme, £4.2 million was spent across the consortium and delivered 372 homes assistance. And in Portsmouth, we delivered 13 measures across 10 homes. The report then details the start of the new Home Upgrade Grant Phase 2, which is a Fabric First whole house retrofit programme specifically for off-gas homes, and this is applicable for owner-occupier homes and private rental homes. The project started at early 2023 and provides funding of up to £38,000 to cover the installation of energy efficient measures, and they're such as insulation, solar PV, heating controls, and potentially clean heat measures such as air source heat pumps. The report then details the various cost caps that are applicable to the scheme, whether that's private rental and owner occupiers, and just details the current position of where we are. So the programme actually started in full flow in October 2023, and the current target is 1,650 households across the consortium, with up to £35 million available. And this year's targets, we are aiming to try and achieve measures in 525 households. And the key impacts that this is going to hopefully deliver, the whole project should save up to 1,000 tonnes of carbon across the whole consortium. And we're aiming to achieve at least a 1 sat band improvement on the EP scores of any properties that that have successful measures in.
Thank you. Councillor Heaney, do you have any questions on this report?
Well, as someone who's not been here before, I'm probably going to be answering some questions which you probably have already answered, but I haven't obviously read the previous reports because I've already got enough to do, and I wasn't going to go back and look at all of those again. Just to say, I mean, I was interested in the numbers. I mean, it's spread very thinly across quite a number of authorities, isn't it? I mean, both schemes. What's been the demand in the city for this? Do you have any figures for demand? Because I'm interested in demand as against people who actually got something, and I'm not quite clear whether the criteria for the, shall I call it the LAD 3, is financial, i.e. there's a means testing for it or not. Can you sort of give me a bit of an insight on the demand, whether it's means tested, and what people, not that people have missed out, well they clearly have, but whether there's more demand than we could meet?
Yes, of course. So demand for the scheme has been steady, but not, it is spread thinly across the 23 consortium areas, and we have to generate the demand from owner occupiers and private rentals. So it is a reflective of how much effort we do try to put out to get the word out there about the scheme. So applications coming through are quite steady, and we do see quite a few in Portsmouth where it does drop down to installations, obviously being a bit lower than maybe we'd like, is due to the supply chain and the availability, but also the eligibility criteria of the scheme. So we do get a lot of applications in from people who are unfortunately not eligible, or their property cannot have a measure installed because of technical reasons. So to cover the eligibility, it's so you can the householder has to have a combined household income of £31,000 per year, or they can receive means tested benefits, but there is evidence required for either of those routes. So it's the income brackets, but it's also the energy performance of their home as it is currently, and we can only provide funding for those with an EPC of D or below.
Does that apply to the LAD 3 scheme, the one we finished, and also the new one, the same criteria, is it?
Yeah, it's been the same criteria for a while now. They did increase it from 30,000 to 31,000 halfway through the LAD 3 and HUG 1 scheme. There is an additional eligibility criteria for the new scheme, the HUG 2 scheme, and that is if a property is in a LSOA area with a low income decile 1 to 3, so the highest areas of deprivation in the city, and there is a map in one of the appendices in this showing those properties. So if they are there, they are automatically eligible and do not have to provide evidence, but they still have to be owner occupied or private rental and have the EPC of D only. So if you look at the map, it doesn't unfortunately apply to many owner occupied households in Portsmouth.
Because I sort of heard what you said earlier about this has not been like widely advertised, because I didn't know about it being available, because obviously I'm feeling don't qualify, but also it's not been widely advertised, and you're saying you're targeting. So are you using what knowledge we have of private sector properties, as well as our housing officers who may know about sold council houses who may be eligible, and you're actually directly contacting owners to say, you may be eligible, let me know what you think now.
Yeah, so we've done a bit of data crunching to try and target households directly. We don't want to have people disappointed applying to something that they're not eligible for. So we do directly contact households that we have EPC data that is publicly available, so we can immediately find those that have a D or below. And then we've done a bit of work to try and assume incomes, which is a bit trickier and less assured. And then we have done some work to assume what measures can be installed, and we will contact the household and say, we think you are suitable for an air source heat pump, for example, and we look at the area outside the house to make sure that a heat pump could be installed within planning permission. We look at the roof surface for properties where solar PV could be installed. So we have tried to refine it down as much as we can to try and improve the return rates on the people that we contact to make sure that they are eligible. That is alongside a wider awareness campaign of our Switched On Portsmouth brand, which as soon as someone enters any of our schemes under Switched On Portsmouth, they will be directed to this if they are thought to be eligible. So we are working hard to promote the Switched On Portsmouth brand across the city, which hopefully will lead people through if they are not directly contacted through our mail outs.
From me, 6.11, 6.11, off-gas dwellings. Is there an equivalent scheme for gas dwellings? Because it does strike me that many of the things which we have here would be exceptionally useful to those who have antique gas connections, which are very common in this city.
Yes, thank you. So this is the only funding for these types of measures to this extent. There was previously funding for on-gas homes. That was the LAD 3 project that is summarised. But as soon as that's closed, there was no further funding for on-gas homes. The off-gas, though, is a bit deceiving. They can have a gas connection to their property. It is whether their main heating source is gas. So if they have a gas boiler, they are not eligible. But if they have a gas cooker but electric heating, then they can apply.
You also mentioned that there were, in some cases, technical reasons why properties were being eligible. Can you expand a little upon that?
Yes, so specific measures might not be able to install. For example, if a roof can't take the weight of the solar panels, if the walls cannot be insulated either because of the cavity maybe that is there, or if they're looking at external wall insulation, if they cannot access all of the areas in order to be able to install it. There are also, I forgot to mention, within the report there are cost caps as well that we are held to within the funding. So if a measure can be installed but is far over the cost cap, we are not able to install it. We have to hit an average amount spent per measure per property. So sometimes properties are unable to get the funding because of that as well.
So is there any replacement at all for the LAD project, or is any expected in the near future?
There's no direct replacement, and we have questioned this, and we are not expecting a direct replacement. There are other support streams available. There is eco funding, which is the energy company obligation. That's not something that we can bid for and access, and households have to contact installers to access that on their behalf. But they can get similar measures, but usually not fully funded. They can get a contribution towards that cost. There is also the Great British Insulation Scheme, which again we can't bid for, and you have to go through an installer. But that is for insulation measures such as loft and cavity walls, so lower cost insulation measures. And eligibility for that is based on what council tax band you are in. So if you're an A to D, you can apply, which is one of the broader eligibility criteria from schemes like this that we've seen. But at the moment, that is it for measures being installed on gas homes.
And lastly, 617, you give us the numbers of homes treated across the consortium area. Do you have equivalent? Do you have the figures for Portsmouth? How many of that 525 are within our boundaries?
I do not, because we have a goal of around 100 properties in Portsmouth, but that is based on if we were splitting the funds across the consortium, dependent on how many off-gas properties we think there are in each area, if we were fairly splitting it. But it is a first-come, first-served scheme, so if we are able to promote the scheme enough and we get more households through the scheme than before another area does, then we can go above that 100. Within some limits, the scheme, 50% of the funding has to be spent in rural areas, and as an urban area, that limits us. So we've got some extensive plans in place to really promote the scheme, to get as many households that could potentially get the funding through. So we're aiming for over that 100.
Anything else?
No, I think that was a forecast figure. We haven't actually got that, but we aim to get about 100, so that's fine. That sounds fine out of that, so I understand that. Yeah. No, sorry, nothing else.
Right, thank you very much. I think what I'm required to do is to receive this, and so I receive it. We now move on to agenda item 4, a broad analysis of the impacts of recent central government policy and target changes to our net zero ambition and associated co-benefits. Right.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Yes, we provide another information report. In the broadest sense, this is our best guess, our best analysis at the moment of how in the last weeks or months, that the government have announced changes to a broad range of areas, including waste and transport and energy requirements for homes. So they've made a number of changes which we believe will be enacted, and we're acting as though they will be. So, as you know, Portsmouth has a goal to be net zero by 2030. So a number of these recent policy changes could affect the big levers that allow us to access funding and powers and change behaviours potentially of residents and businesses to adapt to these changes. So this is very much a multidisciplinary report here, where we talk about the impacts in the homes and buildings areas, within waste management, nature and transport, and we are thankful and grateful that we have officers representing waste, homes and buildings and travel here today who can potentially answer your questions about anything that comes up in particular from our analysis of these changes.
Councillor Heaney.
I do have a few questions. On 3.4.4, we talk about the EPC rating for private landlords. Have we had any response from the Landlords Association about their views on whether they think it's a good idea or whether they've complained that they couldn't achieve it? Have we had any sort of local feedback on that proposal?
I have not received any feedback on that. I've not heard anything yet, but we could definitely reach out to get some feedback on that.
Do we have any other mechanisms? Now, this is probably a housing brief, which is probably what I should also be, because I'm covering that for Charlotte as well, but I haven't had a meeting yet. Whether we have any other resources, grant availability that can help private landlords to improve the heating insulation of their properties.
Yeah, so that sort of ties back into the Warmer Homes project as well, actually. So landlords can receive funding through that scheme. Eligibility is based on their tenant. So the tenant still needs to be eligible and provide all of the evidence, but they can get the funding. They do have to contribute 1/3, so they don't get it fully funded. But with that contribution, they can get those measures installed. There are some limits to that, though. The landlord can only have 4 properties, no more than 4 properties. Yeah, sorry, that's it.
I suppose what I was asking, I obviously see that's the previous scheme, but does Housing Service have any other schemes? Because, dare I say, when I was chair of housing back in the 1990s, we did used to try and help private landlords improve their properties. Obviously, they had to meet conditions, but we had resources ourselves. But I'm assuming that isn't the case now, or is it the case? Do we know?
That's possibly not within our team to directly support landlords like that. We can signpost them to funding that is available, and we would do that. So we would tell them about this scheme and other potential funding sources that they could utilise. But and we also have within the Switched On Portsmouth brand, we have a service for landlords where they can check if they are if their property is compliant with the MEES standards, so they can search that up. So we would offer advice and signposting into support.
I'm now going to move on to waste, because David's here. Waste and recycling. And the section about the DEFRA changes, I can see what you're saying here about this new, I presume, is it guidance or direction? I'm not quite sure about what we should do. The idea that they're allowing dry recyclables to be mixed. I mean, we currently have a contract to provide recycling. Does that allow us any ability to go for mixed recycling or not?
So it's not so much the contract which there's a barrier that prevents us meeting the Environment Act, it's the current infrastructure we have built. So we manage waste disposal across a tripartite between us, Hampshire County Council and Southampton City Council. And between those 3 authorities, we provide all the waste disposal infrastructure across Hampshire, which includes 3 energy recovery facilities and then 2 materials recovery facilities. The limitation in terms of materials is on the structure and those physical buildings that were built at the time. It's an old contract that was signed in 1996, and that infrastructure was developed kind of throughout the 90s into the early noughties. And at that time, it was that infrastructure was built to basically facilitate recycling 6 items, the current items you can put in your green bin. The buildings are actually the kind of limitation to expanding that further within those current facilities. The disposal authorities and the district authorities in Hampshire under the Project Integra banner had been working, or are still working, towards the building of a new materials recovery facility. Land has been bought at Eastleigh, and there is a planning permission in place for a twin stream MRF, and that's a MRF where effectively you'll be able to put glass, pots, tubs and trays, cartons, extra foils in your green bin, and then you would have another bin for paper and cardboard. And that, we thought, met the Environment Act and the government's desire within that act to recycle more items separately at the curbside. The simpler recycling, which hasn't come through in regulation yet, but there is consultations on it, now brings in an exemption to allow authorities to commingle all recycling items, and that is a slight reversal from what the actual Act says. The Act encourages more items to be separated at the curbside. What's coming through now in terms of simpler recycling does allow a commingled exemption to allow all those items to be collected in one bin. As a group of authorities in Hampshire, we now need to review our previous work, which pointed us in the direction of twin stream recycling, and in the city we brought that through in terms of the joint municipal waste management strategy, and all the authorities in Hampshire took that report, which set us on our direction towards twin stream, and we now need to come back and review that work to see whether a commingled mix is more technical, environmental, economically beneficial for all the authorities in Hampshire.
Thank you. It's quite complicated, isn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately it is.
The problem we have is that our residents tend to commingle their rubbish, which is the problem, isn't it? And this is why probably we're having issues with having to dispose of stuff that we wouldn't we can't recycle. And is this preventing us from is this effectively preventing us from increasing our recycling rates? The current system we have, because our rates have been pretty low. I mean, compared to other authorities over the years. I mean, we're fairly near the bottom of the overall e-tables. But if you compare us to our sort of comparable cities like Hull, Leicester, Nottingham, Derby, Plymouth, there's variation within those. But some are doing way better than others, and we appear to be sort of roundabout fairly low.
Yeah, so the administration has introduced things that has improved recycling rates over the last few years. So the introduction of food waste has increased recycling rates in the city. So I haven't got the dates to hand, but if you look back sort of approximately 4 or 5 years ago, we were at approximately 24%. And in that time, food waste has been introduced. We've introduced more bring banks, so pots, tubs and trays, for instance, can now be recycled in bring banks. We expanded the glass bank network and the textile bank network. All those, and carton banks as well, all those have led to an improvement in recycling rates. However, being able to recycle more items at the curbside would be beneficial in terms of boosting the recycling rates further. I don't think there's any doubt in that. So being able to recycle, say, glass, pots, tubs and trays at the curbside would make a difference. In terms of comparing us to other cities, the slight issue with that is one of the measures that's included in recycling rates is green waste or garden waste. And within the city, we're obviously one of the most densely populated cities outside of London, and our green waste tonnage is significantly lower because of the small back gardens. We've got a high proportion of our residents who live in flats as well, so our recycling rates, albeit certainly would be improved by introducing those other items at the curbside, will unlikely be as high as some of those other cities, while garden waste is included as a metric in that overall measurement, just because of the limitations of the city in terms of we just don't have the back gardens or residents with big back gardens to actually boost the recycling rate through that measure.
That's an interesting answer, that if we had bigger gardens, we'd have a better recycling rate. But actually, you could argue, well, if people are not putting the stuff in, I mean, the problem we've got is not the green garden recycling, because that's a paid-for service that's separate. I think it's the other waste recycling. That's the problem, isn't it? We have is the general recycling of household items is where we're not doing well. I mean, I'm trying to remember, and I hope I get this right. I looked at some data from DEFRA from 2021, I think it was, and Hull had a recycling rate of nearly 50%. And I'm thinking, my goodness, how do they manage that? They're a city just like us. I've been to Hull, Are we actually looking at these authorities like that and saying, why are you doing so much better? I'd be interested to know.
I think that the key is obviously being able to recycle more items at the curbside in terms of boosting the overall rate. So I think we know what those cities are doing to boost those rates, and it is being able to recycle more items at the curbside. The kind of planning towards that new materials recovery facility in Eastleigh, which will enable all those materials to be recycled, is kind of the way the way that the whole of Hampshire is moving to be able to do that. And that will, one, obviously boost the amount of items that our residents can recycle at the curbside. We know that's what they want, but also meet the obligations in the Environment Act. So we are working towards that currently, albeit it requires a kind of major construction project to deliver that. And the kind of change in tack from the government has slightly put a stumbling block in the road, but I think the overall plan is still to deliver that facility. Whether that's a twin stream MRF now or something else, I don't know, but it will, the plan is to still build that to allow residents to recycle more at the curbside.
That's very useful, and thank you for that. And maybe I'll come back and have a chat with you about some of the more detailed things at some other time, so I'll leave that there. I do have a couple of other questions. I'm going to take the easy one first, which is the one at the back, which relates to the discussion. And these are two traffic-related questions. So Hayley's sitting there thinking, "Oh my God, what's he going to ask about?" But I think she knows one of the things I'm going to ask about. There's this 324. It talks about support for better parking apps and technology and other changes to parking. This is one of the things the government is encouraging. The problem is the parking app system that we have has never worked. And as far as I'm aware, I've not heard whether we're going to continue to leave the infrastructure in there because it might be useful, or whether we're going to get rid of it because it's just taking up space and is a bit of a nuisance. I mean, I don't know if there's anything different to what I have been told, i.e. that it hasn't worked and it's unlikely to work, and are we going to remove the existing infrastructure, or are we going to leave it there?
Yeah, I don't have a further update than that really. If it's proven that it's not going to work and it's not useful, we will remove the infrastructure. But I'm not clear that we've definitely got that 100% answer.
It's taking quite a long time to find out whether it's going to work. I've been asking this question for a while. So anyway, yeah, I'll come back to that later. One, obviously, and I'm going to take a liberty here because this is really a traffic issue rather than an environment issue, but it talks about the need to prioritise EV infrastructure for residents, etc. There are a couple of general questions I want to ask about that, but I obviously picked up Hayley's email, which says basically no one can charge their car in Portsmouth as of yesterday because we apparently have a safety issue in relation to the use of the lamppost charging stations. And despite the fact that these have been in existence since, I think, 2019, and we've been gradually rolling them out, it's only now somebody's noticed there's a problem. And I'm not sure whether this is the fault of the companies who installed them, i.e. not telling the electricity supplier about what they were doing and that they'd done a safety audit, or whether the electricity company can't find the safety audits they're supposed to have done. Can you shed any light on this rather unfortunate situation?
Effectively, we've had notification from SSEN that there are safety concerns, so as a precaution we have had all the charge points turned off while we investigate, and those investigations are ongoing.
We've had issues with some of them not working, and I know we've had complaints around that. Are you able to say any more? Because I've not heard of any safety issues in the last 4 years. What has suddenly become an issue that requires the whole thing? That's a pretty drastic step to take. And have they been open about what the problem is?
So that's what we're currently investigating with SSEN and both suppliers. So at the moment, the investigation's ongoing.
So they won't tell us what the problem is, which sounds quite bizarre. I mean, I have to say this is a really bizarre situation. And I've already had somebody contact me who says, how am I going to charge my car? You know, I need to go to work. It's an absolute disaster for the electric car owners. And I do hope that the electricity company will speed up their response, so tell us what the problem is rather than messing about not telling us. It seems to me ridiculous that they haven't been absolutely open up front already about it, and because it's a real concern to people in the city. I will just ask a couple of other things as well. We've talked about the strategy for EV infrastructure, and I fully understand the argument about a strategy. You know, we need some sort of plan about what we're doing. And the strategy talks in broad terms about prioritising EV infrastructure for residents, enabling conversion to electric vehicles. And I'm assuming we are working through some of those issues, because it seems to me, as somebody has said to me, you know, the more electric charging points we have on the street, the more competition there is for parking spaces. And we already have a parking strategy which is being developed. And I want to be sure that we address some of the questions rather than just having broad statements about we're going to do this, and when the thing gets a problem, because we've got more, we'll think about it then. You know, I think we need to think about it now rather than think about it later. So I just want some reassurance that the strategy will actually address the problem rather than just say we'd like to do good things.
Yeah, it definitely will. We're just analysing the consultation results at the moment, and then we'll be bringing forward both the EVI and the parking strategies in January for adoption. So, yeah, we're working through that, and we'll make sure that that's picked up.
And does that cover the words which you have in your third bullet point, that you're going to transform infrastructure provision? Is there anything more you can add to that at this point?
So we've been allocated £3.682 million from government to bring forward EV infrastructure in the city. So yeah, we've got quite an ambitious strategy planned to roll out EV infrastructure to make us an EV-friendly city.
Making sure, of course, that it is reliable and there's not going to be closed off at short notice.
Yeah.
Can I just make a couple of points?
Yes, sure.
The interesting thing is, I mean, I think what we've said when we've had the transport meeting is that we need to encourage more fast charging units in the city, and particularly getting organisations like supermarkets who have large car parks to make these available for their customers. And also, although they're private companies, clearly the filling stations, which currently fill up with petrol, are going to have to think about, well, what are they going to have any infrastructure for electric? And if they could be encouraged to think about that as well. I don't know what discussions we've had or what the company's general policies are, but that seems to me to be something that should be on the agenda, at least for them, in order to make sure that there's quick and easily available charging for people who need it, and can't necessarily find a residential street where they have to run around and try and find a place to charge up.
Yeah, so the government funding that's coming forward is promoting slower charging in residential areas, but the strategy covers fast charging and charging at other locations, so we'll be bringing that forward ourselves.
I'll be glad to know that's the last question.
Right, you've covered some of the questions I wanted to ask as well. But if we can stay with transport for a moment, there's a bit here which, probably because I'm not the normal chairman of this meeting, I don't fully understand. You have in one of your last bullet points under 324, support for roadworks lane rental schemes. What is a lane rental scheme, and how will it be beneficial to have one introduced here?
So lane rental schemes can reduce the impact of roadworks and incentivise utility companies to avoid busy roads at busy times or speed up roadworks. So there's obviously benefits in terms of congestion and reducing roadwork impacts across the city.
So they will have to rent the road from the council and pay us for the privilege of digging up our roads, yeah?
Yeah, there'll be a rental, so in terms of financial impact to the suppliers for that.
Right. Thank you for that. Coming back to matters of waste, you talked about curbside collection. Do you consider that curbside collection of anything more complex than we're doing at the moment is feasible within most parts of the island, of this Portsea Island, given that they are flat-fronted properties or have exceedingly small forecourts?
It will be required under government legislation, so it won't be a matter of whether it can or can't be achieved. It will need to be achieved because the government are wanting a consistent, all authorities in England to be able to recycle the same items at the curbside, and that includes more items than we're currently able to do in Portsmouth through our facility. So it will be a requirement that government are asking us to do, yes. The differences between what we were planning to do and what we may do now is that the strategy up to now has been to introduce something called twin stream recycling, where the current green bin would be utilised for glass, pots, tubs and trays, foil items. On top of your current items you can recycle, and you would have another bin for your paper and cardboard, and that would be across all properties in Portsmouth, whether you're flat fronted, a curbside or blocks of flats, and of course food waste as well. The option that now has been introduced is the exemption I spoke to you about, which is where they are now suggesting that all those materials could be collected in one bin as opposed to after more separation, which may be more beneficial to our residents or simpler for our residents. Of course, there's a larger piece of work to look at in terms of all the technical, economic feasibility work around not just Portsmouth, but we need to consider the whole of Hampshire, and we've got a network of transfer stations and facilities, and it's all of that infrastructure that needs to be considered as a whole, including, of course, our residents and their ability to recycle and how easy it's for them at the curbside. So we need to consider that as a whole piece of work rather than just focus on kind of whether or not residents are, the easiest, the simplest for our residents is a whole piece of work, in addition to whether it's a simpler scheme for residents.
I think this is important and that it is done properly because Councillor Heaney and I represent a ward in which we are getting a large number of complaints from people about recycling bins which cannot be taken easily through flat-fronted properties are being left on the curbside and actually making this difficult for pedestrians.
Yeah, it's very challenging for flat-fronted. We've got about 9,000 properties in Portsmouth that are flat-fronted. We are doing a piece of work across our flat-fronted properties at the moment around education in terms of bins on the street. In our flat-fronted properties, residents can choose to present 3 bin bags as opposed to having a refuse bin. And we have introduced a number of options in terms of residents having different options that aren't necessarily a big recycling bin. We've got kind of boxes or stackable units which are more accessible for residents to take back through their property. So those are things we are considering, and particularly with more items that can be recycled, it's important that we have a range of options for residents, as we know that a big recycling bin might not be achievable for residents to take through, but a series of caddies might be easier for them to get through, but while recognising there is challenges in flat-fronted properties.
Good luck. Coming back a little further to 3.4.4, the government's recent announcement. I think one thing which I certainly consider to be retrograde is the proposal that requires private rental properties to have a minimum EPC score of C have been scrapped. Is there anything which can be done to encourage landlords to improve their properties so that they will at least reach D rather than E?
Yes, that ties into the sort of educational piece that we're doing with landlords. So whilst we talk to them about those standards and how they have to be at an E, we do definitely encourage that they continue to invest in their property to bring it higher than that, and we'll do that by linking them to funding available. We encourage as much as we possibly can that they aim for a D. Previously we had been encouraging that they aim for a C because this was potentially going to be in place, so in order to future-proof we said aim for a C. But we will continue to encourage that they improve their property beyond the E.
That concludes my questions. Do you have anything more? No. Right. Well, thank you very much for answering the questions from 2 incomers. And thank you very much for the courtesy you've shown to the chair. That concludes the entertainment of the afternoon. Good afternoon.